There are two primary values that shaped the man. The first was the prophetic consciousness of the Old Testament prophets and Jesus, the bearer of the kingdom. Henlee had indomitable courage, and it led him to study beyond his background, challenge the conventional in church and society, and risk rejection for the cause of truth. He never seemed to be bothered in the least by those who disagreed with him. He usually responded to their angry letters with a letter of humor that would communicate his point. Prophets have an inordinate ability to sleep at night, and that was never a problem for Henlee. His second value was a maxim he lived by, a quote by Sir Roger de Coverley he learned in the 5th grade. Quote, "There's much to be said on both sides of every question," unquote. He was a pragmatic prophet, never living in the ivory tower, but constantly seeking to apply the prophetic message to the realities and complexities of real life, whether in the corridors of Norton Hospital, the hallways of City Hall, the sanctuary of the church, or the minds of students in a seminary classroom. John Claypool was Henlee's pastor, and he loved to tell stories about him around the lunch table at McAfee. He never laughed more than when he described riding with Henlee on an airplane to the Christian Life Commission meeting here in Atlanta, where Henlee would debate Joseph Fletcher on situation ethics. Ever serious, John said to Henlee, "Henlee, don't you think paradox is probably the most important theological category for making sense of reality?" True to form, remembering his childhood teacher, de Coverley, he thought for a moment, smiled with that mill worker's twinkle of his, looked at John and said, "Yes, John," and "No, John." Then he roared with laughter. That was Henlee Barnette. The last conversation I had with him was about a year before he died. I called on the telephone to see how he was. He was full of energy, had been to the Union Gospel Mission the night before to receive an award, was going somewhere else that night, and I asked about what he was writing. His first response was, and remember he's 92 at this point, "Whatever's making me mad today." Then growing more serious, he said, "I'm spending most of my time writing my memoirs for my children, but they aren't worth publishing." Well, they were worth publishing, and we should all be grateful to Walter Sheridan at the Center for Baptist Studies and Mark Jolly at Mercer University for convincing him to allow the rest of us to read the wondrous story of his life and work in A Pilgrimage of Faith, My Story. All you have to do to get the rest of the story is to read that book. Now I want to conclude with a question. And that question today for all of us is, what happens to the great tradition of 20th century Baptist social ethics in the 21st century? When you study this tradition, the great contribution of Baptists to the world has not been our theology. We've had good theologians. But it's the ethicists among us who stand out. After all, we're meeting in a state that produced 2 Baptist Nobel Peace Prize winners, Martin Luther King and Jimmy Carter. Look carefully at the Baptists who've made a difference in this century. And with 1 or 2 exceptions, they were formed by theological education institutions. Rochester, Walter Rauschenbusch, Crozier, Martin Luther King, and Martin England. Southwestern, T.B. Maston, Foy Valentine, Jimmy Allen, and on and on and on and on we could go. Southern, O.T. Binkley, J.B. Weatherspoon, Henlee Barnette, and on and on and on we could go. It was seminaries that shaped the social consciousness of Baptists. That consciousness can no longer be found in the 6 seminaries of a denomination more committed to affirming a culture of consumerism, so-called just war, and right-wing politics. Unless we build a new tradition of prophetic consciousness that challenges our culture in 13 fledgling CBF-supported institutions that so far have no more than one full-time professor of Christian ethics, we risk losing an emerging generation that knows little more than the names of these giants of social consciousness. Our time is short, our resources are limited, but with resolve and commitment, we must rebuild a tradition that made a difference not only in America, but the world, as a light set on a hill, that the good news of Jesus Christ is a message that transforms both individuals and the social and political systems of this world with justice, peace, and mercy. The best honor we can give these men and women of the past is to build on what they taught with a 21st century ethic that is shaped by free and faithful Baptists.